A decision that could redefine citizenship in America is now in the hands of the Supreme Court of the United States.
Something that's been interesting to me, kind of in a similar lens, and this is always interesting on Supreme Court oral arguments days, you hear the specificity of the legal language in court, and then you go outside the court and you hear how advocates and activists are talking about it. And the New York Times is reporting that celebrity chef and activist Jose Andres gave a rousing speech to a crowd and said, "Today is not about defending a constitutional right. Today is about defending the pure idea of what America is and will be," end quote. Obviously, Jose Andres has a different audience than the Supreme Court justices, but what do you make of the layman's interpretation or the advocate's interpretation of what this case ultimately means in American law?
This case is profoundly important. I mean, being a citizen, which the Supreme Court has recognized, is one of the single most important, vital things that someone can be in any society, and this goes to the very heart of that, and the way it has been recognized in the United States for a very long time now. So this is a case of, great importance, if not the most important case of the term. We go back and forth on tariffs versus birthright, but it is certainly one of the most important cases of the last few years. I would like to draw a distinction, though, between law and policy. One might say, listen, they think that birthright citizenship is a bad policy. They may say, like much of the rest of the world, there should be no birthright citizenship. But that's totally different that in terms of what the law actually is and what we understand the 14th Amendment to be. And then, of course, there's the converse, where someone might say, that birthright citizenship is wonderful and it should be recognized, but maybe that doesn't necessarily mean just because that's one political position, that's what the Constitution says or a statute says. So I think, especially in profoundly important issues like this, it's very vital to separate law from politics, which can be very hard to do, and I know a lot of people do not, but it's something I really want to stress, even though that may not be particularly popular in this day and age.
That's a fair point. What happens next? I know you got a lot of questions in the live blog about when we can expect a decision and procedurally what happens. So for the Forbes audience, what happens next week, next month, et cetera?
So we will not hear much of anything about birthright citizenship from the justices or the court in the next few weeks and months. What happens next is they meet about the case itself. They then go in conference. No one else is allowed in conference, including the clerks. They then voice their positions, how they vote. They then take a straw vote. At that point, they assign the majority writer. And so the Chief Justice assigns the opinion if he is in the majority. Otherwise, it's the most senior justice, which would be Justice Thomas. And based on that, they start writing the opinion. And some will write concurrences, some will write dissents. They'll go back and forth. They'll send their drafts. It'll get worked on. But it is a months-long process. And given how important this case is and how relatively late in the term it was argued, we will not likely get a decision until the end of June or even early July. The term usually it comes to a close at the end of June, but sometimes it stretches in July based on the court's calendar. And I am not in love with this at SCOTUS blog because, it could be a busy early July as well. So, but in any event, we're not getting anything from the justices, or it's very unlikely we'll get anything from the justices until, end of June, early July. And it may well be the last case decided of the entire term.
It may well be the last case decided. So I guess patience is the watchword for those who want to see what happens next. Zach, we've covered a lot of ground, and it's impossible to discuss everything that happened in court, but is there anything else that you will be watching for or anything else that you are reflecting on following the oral arguments in the birthright citizenship case today?
I mean, I'm just reflecting, as I think as so many other people, about this court's relationship with this particular administration. We've seen, on the one hand, they struck down the tariffs cited against Trump. They may well strike down the EO on birthright citizenship as well. They did so in the National Guard case, but then, of course, as we all know, and not just this term, they've sided with the administration or sided with the administration's positions on what's known as the emergency docket or the interim docket quite a bit, and in a number of other cases. So I think if the court sides against the administration in this case, I think it paints and continues to paint a very nuanced picture of how this court operates in the era of the Trump administration.
Zach Shemtab, executive editor of SCOTUS blog, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been a really busy day, and we appreciate your coverage at SCOTUS blog as always.
Thank you. Very glad to have been here.
The discussion around the Supreme Court of the United States and birthright citizenship immediately highlights just how consequential this case is. At its core, the issue isn't just legal. It touches identity, national values, and the definition of who belongs. When a case reaches this level, it's no longer just another court decision. It becomes a moment that could shape generations. What stands out in this exchange is the clear distinction between law and policy. While many advocates argue passionately about what should happen, the court's role is to interpret what the Constitution actually says. That distinction is crucial, especially when discussing the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which has long been understood to guarantee birthright citizenship. The tension arises when political beliefs collide with established legal interpretations. The behind-the-scenes process of the court also adds gravity. Once oral arguments end, everything moves into a closed-door phase. No cameras, no public access, just the justices debating and shaping the outcome. This quiet deliberation contrasts sharply with the loud public discourse outside, reminding us that the most important decisions often happen far from the spotlight. Timing is another key factor that builds anticipation, with a decision expected toward the end of the term. Like story, the longer the deliberation, the more it signals the complexity and potential division among the justices. In many cases, the biggest rulings are also the ones that take the longest to finalize. Ultimately, this case reflects a broader pattern in how the court navigates politically charged issues. Rather than aligning consistently with one side, the justice unpredictability is what makes this moment so significant, because when the ruling finally arrives, it won't just answer a legal question. It will reveal how the court sees its role in shaping the future of the country.